Before we start today's episode, let me tell you about my latest adventure. Introducing Lux Coffee Co., a specialty-grade coffee company inspired by creativity and creatives. The debut range is sourced from some of the best farms in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Africa, offering beautiful flavors and notes. Our single origins and house blends are roasted every Monday for next day shipping. Visit luxcoffee.co.uk and use code PODCAST for 15% off your first order. And yes, there's exceptional merch too. Lux Coffee Co. is where art meets exceptional coffee.
I had a great therapist. And believe it or not, the first time that I ever gave a version of that lecture where I talked about the loss and I talked about all of the struggles, believe it or not, the first time I rehearsed that was with my therapist. I meet with her on Friday morning and I said, "Hey, do you mind if we do something different this week?" And then I was like, "Wait, I pay you. I can do whatever I want." So yeah, she was a huge help. And when you share these kinds of stories in a public setting, as I do, you end up connecting with people who have similar stories.
Welcome to Mindful Creative Podcast, a show about understanding how to deal with the highs and lows of creative lives. My name is Radim Malinic, and creativity changed my life, but it also nearly killed me. In this season, inspired by my book of the same title, I am talking to some of the most celebrated figures in the creative industry. In our candid conversations, my guests share their experiences and how they overcame their challenges and struggles, how they learned to grow as creatives. A creative career in the 21st century can be overwhelming. I wanted to capture these honest and transparent conversations that might help you find that guiding light in your career. Thank you for joining me on this episode and taking the first or next step towards regaining control of your creative life. You ready? This is the last episode in the Mindful Creative series, and I'm eternally thankful to every single guest who shared their story with me. I'm eternally grateful to everyone who has listened to these conversations, and I feel I have just the perfect story for the final episode of this season. My guest today is an artist and designer living in San Francisco, California, and he has spent and enjoyed a range of disciplines throughout his more than 20-year career, from UX leadership, creative direction, and interaction design, photography, data visualization, and filmmaking, working along with the likes of Google and IDEO. In our conversation, he talks about the dotcom era, agency burnout, and his transformative years at IDEO, where he first experienced imposter syndrome. We cover a deeply personal turn that transformed his creativity into his artistic identity. He discusses the revolution from creating art to creating content, the ethical implications of AI training on artists' work, and his current role in advising creative AI startups. This episode explores themes of addiction, obsession, creative authenticity, and the importance of personal narrative in an increasingly homogenized digital landscape. It's my pleasure to introduce Burton Rast. Hey Burton, how are you doing? It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. So good to see you.
I'm glad to have you on the show because, yes, we met at Paradiso in person. I feel like we've orbited in the same sphere of talks and festivals in the last decade or so. And yeah, I wanted to talk to you about all of the things that you do, about the things that you've been up to and what you might be up to in the future. So for those who may have never heard of you, how would you introduce yourself?
My name is Burton Rast. I'm an artist and designer living in San Francisco, California. Born and raised in Chicago. I've been in the Bay Area for about 10 years. I used to shudder at the term generalist, but now I kind of embrace it. I enjoy that there's quite a few things that I like to do. In my professional life, I'm a designer. In my life outside of getting paid, I'm a lifelong artist, avid photographer. It's funny, I always struggle with this when I give lectures.
You said you shudder at the term of generalist. Why?
I used to. Well, because for the first 10 years of my career, I was purely hard skills, design and code. And that kind of separated me from a lot of the folks who did just one or the other. And it was, if I'm being perfectly honest, it was always easy to get a job offer when I was interviewing around and looking to move on to whatever the next step in my career, because companies were really excited that they could hire somebody who knew both of those things. It wasn't until maybe about 15 years into my career, I was interviewing at Google, where ultimately I ended up working for 5.5 years. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. And the recruiter to whom I was speaking said, "Oh, so you're kind of a generalist." And she got to know me, and as I was sort of moving my way through the interview process and talking to different folks. And like I said, I shuddered. Like it was like, no, like I have a very defined skill set. But then before I responded to her, I thought, oh, okay, well, I just spent the last 7 years working at a design firm called IDEO, which really changed me from a purely hard skills person into more of a generalist, right? Someone who knows the soft skill stuff, whether it's presenting or research or synthesis, or how do you do user research interviews and sort of synthesize that data to inform design decisions. So yeah, it took me a moment to learn to embrace the challenge and realize, oh no, that's a good thing now. The older that I get and the more that I've grown into design leadership, it's good to have a breadth of skills and experience that inform.
Yeah. I think in terms of an employment, being a generalist, maybe that sort of confuses people. But in terms of being an artist, designer, coder, that's a benefit.
And as you get older, the sort of breadth of your ambitions change, right? When I got my first design job, I remember talking to my father and saying, oh my God, I get to go into work, put on my headphones, listen to music that I love for 8 hours, and just bang away on design and code and animation. I am going to do this for the rest of my life, right? Just give me my marching orders and I will create stuff so long as you pay me. But yeah, as you get a little bit older, it's like, no, you learn more about the process of design and how do you really create sort of meaningful products or services or experiences that actually get at solving for real human need, rather than just back in 2000 when I started, it was just like crack open Photoshop.
What did you listen to when you were coding?
Yeah, it's funny. Grew up on sort of all things counterculture, right? Like anything that the sort of PTA moms and the parents hated, I was into, right? So I came up in the punk and hardcore scene in Chicago, which was really, I didn't know it at the time, but that was sort of the genesis of my interest in design, right? Like I was always a super artistic kid, always sort of sketching, illustrating, designing, and doodling. But the punk scene, right, where my friends and I were making our own clothes, patches, buttons, we were cutting and dyeing our own hair. We were making flyers and album artwork for all of our friends' bands, really creating without permission, right? Like they sort of asking forgiveness in lieu of permission ethos, right? So yeah, it was a lot of punk and hardcore, really came up in the golden age of hip hop, was deeply embedded in not just the punk scene, but the rave scene in the early 90s in Chicago. So like my friends and I we would go straight from like the punk show with our mohawks up. The punk show would let out at like 11 or 12 at night, and then we would go to the rave, mohawks still up, until 6, 7, 8 in the morning. So yeah, everything from punk and hardcore to electronic and hip hop.
You mentioned that it was creativity without permission. When you think about it, because our paths, even though we grew up in different parts of the world, are very similar. I was in more of a sort of death metal kid. We were sort of more in a sort of grindy thing, and we were making all sorts of stuff ourselves. But I never even thought that we needed permission. We started the bands without having instruments. Like we were excited about whatever could be that you see a glimmer of in a sort of distance. Like, oh, there's a band. How did you start a band? How did you make it? How did you do this? I mean, just work the stuff out. Because thinking about it, there was no such thing as an imposter syndrome when we were doing this. No one said like, oh, am I doing this? I don't feel quite right. We were just too excited and just too focused on this stuff, right? It was like, because you just said like without a permission, I'm thinking there was definitely no imposter syndrome back then, and especially at this.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like more support and information on your creative journey, you can pick up one of my books to help you do just that. My titles cover branding, graphic design, illustration, all the way to career business advice with ideas how to navigate the highs and lows of the creative process. You can pick up signed paperbacks at no extra cost from my store at novemberuniverse.co.uk, and we are shipping worldwide. Use code PODCAST for extra 10% off your order, and you can find the links in the show notes. Any day should be a new book day.
No, and it's funny. I knew that we would end up talking about this. That didn't appear for me really for like the first 10 years of my career. I began my career at a dotcom era startup, and that was just, like I said, oh my God, I get to throw on my headphones and just make cool shit all day. I went from there to a client side job that was super boring. It was when the dotcom bubble burst. I actually went to the unemployment office because I don't have any sort of formal training or schooling or anything. So I didn't know, where do you find a job now that this entire industry collapsed? The thing that you thought you were going to be doing for the next 20, 30, 50 years doesn't exist anymore. So I went to the unemployment office, filled out all the paperwork, and then I was introduced to a recruiter the next day who had no problems lining me up with this super boring corporate sort of Fortune 500 client side job where the company attitude was, I guess we need a website, so we should hire someone who knows how to do that. So yeah, no imposter syndrome there at all. It's just so easy. I went from there to the ad agency world for the next 3 years. I don't know whether you've spent any time in the agency world. It's an unkind industry. It's very aggressive. Everything that you create lives in the world for as long as the media buy lives, which is, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, right? So like whatever you do, whatever you kill yourself working on for 70, 80, 90 hours a week, boom, it disappears just as quickly as it showed up. I really didn't experience anything resembling imposter syndrome until I got hired at IDEO, which was 10 years into my career. And all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by people who know things that I don't know, right? Who have an understanding of design as this holistic process, this sort of research-driven, pretty well-defined process. They all went to Stanford, MIT, ITP at NYU, Carnegie Mellon, Royal College of Art, Umeo, CIID, right? Like all the top design programs in the world. And that was the first time where it was like, oh, wait, I'm surrounded by people who know things that I don't know, that I'm realizing I need to know if I want to grow into the kind of design leader who I imagine myself becoming. So yeah, but come on, like the sort of talk ethos and learning how to do art and design on your own and creating with your friends. Like, no, that was like the purest time, right? Like there was no semblance of anything resembling imposter syndrome.
You were creating it with the equals of yourself. There was no one really, there was no hierarchy. There was no system of this person's more important. And everyone was scrappy. Everyone was excited. And yeah, well, actually, because I know a little bit of your story, obviously, when you go to the IDEO, you were like, oh shit, these people are educated and they know stuff. But it's almost like you crossed over to like a different group of people, like let's say the different demographic, and all of a sudden like, oh, okay, this is slightly different. But before we get to IDEO, I want to talk about those earlier days, because I love the story, how you worked for a hotel, that you installed a cracked Photoshop on every single computer in the building. That's just genius. We need to talk about that.
Yeah, so it's funny. Like I said, I don't have any sort of formal training or schooling or anything like that. I was just floundering about. Like, obviously I knew I was an artist, but like I had friends in Chicago who went to art schools and got degrees in sculpture or this, that, the other. Excuse me. And you see them graduating with those degrees, and it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do with that? So I had never really considered art school as an option. But then what do you do? How do you connect your skills as an artist with a career, with doing something that you enjoy, where you can pay the rent? So yeah, I was just bouncing from one go nowhere job to the next. And I worked all of them, right? Restaurant, back of house, cleaning grease traps, unloading semi trucks, like service, hospitality, garbage job. And I ended up working the front desk at this busted old hotel north of Chicago. It's funny, this is 1997, 1998. To give you an idea, we had one 56K modem for the entire hotel, which is for not just the computers in the offices, but every hotel room. There were 277 hotel rooms. So you could barely get online. My brother and I worked there together. We were learning how to use Napster and all these programs to borrow the music that we wanted to listen to. So you could barely get online to begin with at this hotel. And then making matters worse, my brother and I were constantly using a 56K modem to download whatever the new Underworld album, right? Or like whatever it was. But a friend of mine who was going to art school for music production was learning Photoshop and HTML and Flash, this, that, and the other, just in his elective courses. And he was the one, and I show his photo and I talk about him in my lectures, Jay Hill. He was the one who showed me this stuff, right? And he showed me this Flash animation that he had created that was, because he was a DJ and a producer, it was a couple of turntables and you click the mouse and scratch the record and load different songs. And so it was audio, it was visual, it was animation and illustration. I had never seen anything like it. And I was he opened the door for me, because it's like, oh, well, Jay's not even going to school for this, right? This is an elective class. This is just like a fun thing he's doing on the side. If he can learn it, then I can learn it. So yeah, I learned how to pirate software and then installed all of the software that I wanted to learn on all of the hotel computers, so that any moment in between checking in guests, I could keep working my new craft. And I bought books, and we're a couple of old guys, so I will date myself here. I bought books on HTML, DHTML, Flash, this, that, and the other at like Borders and Barnes and Noble. And I would read these on the subway going to and from the hotel. And then everything that I just learned in the book, I'm like chomping at the bit. And as soon as I get to work, I don't care about the guests at all. Like I want to jump on these computers, put into practice all of the things that I just learned. That's how I put a portfolio together. I left from that hotel to the dotcom startup that hired me, my first ever design job. That's where I put my portfolio together.
I absolutely love that story.
One of my best friends to this day, and my brother and I, we used to use this program called Hotline. It was like a FTP or Napster or whatever the hell. People would just host files, go to a website to search who had what on Hotline servers. And of course, we were trying to find pirated copies of Photoshop and Flash and all of these crazy expensive programs that there's no way that we could afford. But on one of the outline servers, we found, because you could poke around all the folders on the server and see what other files they had. So we saw this curiously named folder and went into it. And someone had recreated every state, like all 50 United States, state IDs and driver's license templates. We downloaded the whole thing, right? And that was how I learned Photoshop, is the incentive of like, oh, wait, we didn't even care about getting into the bars at that age, right? We just wanted to see the bands that were playing 21 and over shows that we didn't get into. So we found there were only 2 states that were still doing that sort of old school laminated driver's licenses, Maine and Indiana. And that's how we learned Photoshop, is making Maine and Indiana fake IDs that we just accidentally happened upon when we were trying to learn how to pirate software.
What can I say? I mean, what a genius story, because it's, again, it goes back to the punk rock. Like, you wanted to be in the show, like, whatever, with drinking, you wanted to see the band, there's a template, you're going to do it. That's how you learn it. Because I got my first job on the back of making our band tapes and CD covers using Corel Draw. That's what I was using. And I had a rudimentary understanding of it, like align things and do whatever. And just like, I had a couple of summer jobs when I did some stuff with like sign writers and sign makers. But that was enough back then to actually get a job and just say, hey, I can do some of this stuff. And if sometimes you find yourself, you could do more than people who actually employed that. You're like, that's enough. Obviously, we live in a much more busy and more complicated place now. But back then, it was just a beautiful innocence. Can you use it? Well, the answer should be no, but I'm going to definitely say yes. Can you use a Mac? No, but I'm going to say yes. That's the beautiful thing about it.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny, and I can hear it in the attitude that you're describing when you talk about not having imposter syndrome when you're much younger and the sort of pure time. The thought never crossed your mind that you wouldn't just do it, right? Like, it's like, well, oh, my buddy is learning how to do this thing that looks interesting to me. Well, obviously, I'm going to learn to pirate software because I don't have $1,000 for Photoshop. I'm going to buy a bunch of books at the local bookstore and just do it, right? Like,
I think we were lucky there because there was a lot more in a sense, a lot more time to actually spend on development, because I remember having books on freehand. I remember books. Literally remember reading a book on Illustrator. Like, I just wanted to know whatever you click, like, what's the shortcuts? What can I do? Like, how can I use it as an instrument? Because when you find yourself like clicking and like, okay, there's a menu and this is like, I want to click stuff. I want to make it fast. I want to make it like naturally, rather than sort of be slave to the software and kind of making it sort of on the basis of making mistakes and happy accidents. Like, I was like, no, I want to be in charge here, because I remember trying to do some sort of music production in from around 2000 in a program called Acid, if you remember Acid, and it was kicking my ass. I was sampling Incubus and Dan O'Brien and Cold Cut, and I was like, yeah, this is shit. I was like, I'm gonna leave this aside, but I can definitely do more of the Corel Draw and Photoshop and Illustrate a bit better. And that was my path going forward. I'm glad I stuck with it, because when we look back at our choices, it's definitely one of the ones that I enjoyed.
I do know that software. My brother and a number of my friends ended up going into music production and starting bands and this, that, and the other. And if I'm being honest, I've always felt really fortunate that my interest was more sort of visual design and art and photography, animation and code, because music is one of the disciplines that I refer to personally as the showbiz discipline, right? Whether it's music or acting or writing or any of these disciplines where you might be the best in the world at what you do. But if you don't have that moment of luck and connection where you're recognized and identified by the industry, like I said, you could be the best in the world at what you do, and you won't necessarily make a career of it. Whereas in our industry, you work your craft super hard and you put a portfolio together. You might not end up working your dream job, but you will find a job that pays the rent and you can do this for a living. So I always felt fortunate that for whatever reason, I was drawn more to the visual arts.
I don't know many musicians who would end up being generalists in that way. But what I want to talk about, obviously, around that age when you were traveling between Chicago and San Francisco and being a punk rocker, there was a few setbacks. There was an accident, there was addiction, and it's kind of almost like a coming of age story, because like you just go with the scene, you do your thing, and then there's a setback. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. With the benefit of 2020 hindsight, it's easy to look back and pretend that it was a sort of neat and tidy and linear story. And, I overcame whatever setback or whatever issue and then gone to become the person who I am today. But it's a lot messier. We like to think, and it's funny. I was just talking to a friend about this the other day, another speaker friend. Challenge of having only 45 minutes, as we typically do, to tell our stories in the context of a talk, is that it naturally presents as linear, when the reality, and I know this is an audio podcast, but I'm pantomiming this. So it's wiggle, right? Like that the story is not linear. It's way messier. It's sort of this hairball of a mess of a thing. You do your best to hope is moving forward in the aggregate. The fact of the matter, and I don't want to go too deep into it today, but the fact of the matter is I had kind of a bumpy childhood, and I ended up in a friend group of folks with very similar stories to mine. And many of us did fall victim to addiction and to a period in our lives where that was sort of how we coped and managed what it was that each of us went through. But the long story short is, I mentioned my buddy Jay Hill, who sort of turned me onto this software and made it accessible for me. He showed that to me at a time that I really needed something, that I needed some kind of purpose and direction. And I was coming out of that period in my life, but I didn't really see a path forward. What I did know is the moment that I found it, I became so full tilt obsessed. I knew that I was taking all of the energy that I had put into addiction, because addiction is a full-time job, right? It consumes your whole life. It consumes your everyday. It takes a lot of time and energy. And I knew that I was taking all of that energy and putting it into this new thing. And I knew that I was probably doing so like in an unhealthy way. I let it completely consume my life, but I was okay with it because it felt purposeful. because it felt productive. It's okay if this is all I'm doing morning, noon, and night, provided it's leading to something. And what it led to was a portfolio that got me a job.
There's definitely something about replacing addiction with obsession, because you can, like, when you start seeing the things happen in front of your eyes that you just created, even how rudimentary they were back then, you were like, oh, this is me, I'm doing this, and actually there's someone having an opinion, this is going somewhere, this is actually showing me the way. Because obsession, I think, is the right word to use, because I can relate to it. You can easily work 17 hours a day and you wish there was 48 hours a day, and you wish you cloned yourself, because you all of a sudden you're in charge. Because when you talk about childhood, like a challenge in childhoods, they usually come with very little control of your destiny. Like, you don't always have that chance of, like, okay, how is this going to pan out? What decisions can I make? Like, no, I'm not fully in control. I'm not old enough on this. Whereas when we get to actually being able to get hold of our lives, it's a beautiful hideaway. Creativity is a beautiful hideaway of, like, okay, you know what? I can deal with my life just in, like, the traumas and the past, the escapades. I'll deal with them a little bit later, but for now, I'm gonna literally cut myself off, from the world, get into the zone, and actually just me and my creativity will pretend like we are okay for now. Because that's, you can almost, like, when you reached, I mean, especially back then, I would say we can easily reach a state of flow and go in, you know what? I'm not distracted. I'm focusing 100% on what I'm making. In fact, like having headphones on, crashing out like snow. I mean, I had to replace a number of Wacom tablets because I just destroyed them by drumming. It sounds like a perfect snare drum. It's perfect. So, but yeah, and then you realize, shit, actually, it's time to face my demons, face on, and make a bit more sense of our lives. Because maybe that overworking might be a bit unhealthy, because
And it's funny, like, because it's still, that's who I am to this day. And the people who know me best, like, I was at a show with a buddy of mine at this great little art nonprofit called Gray Area, and I'm with one of my closest friends, and he knew that I was in the middle of working on something, and, like, really working out, like, something that I was proud of, and I was, like, a challenge that I was really looking forward to solving for. And he said to me, he literally said, we're on a Sunday afternoon, it's an all-day show, and he says, oh man, you've got that look in your eyes, go home. He's like, I know, you need to do it. You need to do it. Go home.
It's impossible to grow out of. Absolutely impossible. Yeah, you can have, it's nice that you got supporting people around you going, you know what, go and sort it out. As you mentioned, you've worked with Google, you've worked with IDEO, and along that journey, you've discovered photography. And to the point where photography became one of your, almost like a leading, I would say, like, identities.
It has. And it is the thing that is infinitely more meaningful for me than, I am very fortunate to have worked on dream jobs and for companies and clients, and certainly alongside incredibly talented fellow designers, certainly that I never saw coming when I was younger. And I feel very fortunate for my career as a designer. But photography, it has always been a passion, but I feel like everyone is sort of trying to figure out what is their personal brand and what is their look and what is their whatever it is. And now that everyone has a high resolution camera in their pocket, I feel like it's never been more difficult to sort of define whatever your aesthetic. You've seen my lectures, so I know that your audience does not. For anyone who's seen my photography, that's very stark, very contrasty, very sort of exclusively black and white. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to take very vivid, colorful images. And I was actually doing a series. I was living and working in Lima, in Peru, with a big IDEO client down there for the spring and summer of 2016. And I was literally doing a series. I had one of the clients help me to work out the name, forgive my terrible accent, but it was called Paletas de Color Peruana, right? Which roughly translates the color palettes of Peru. So literally a series of full color images of this stunningly beautiful and vividly colorful place. And right in the middle of it, I'd never had a more exhausting project. We had a partner team in London. The client CEO split his time between New York and San Francisco. My sort of career as a speaker and a lecturer was really starting to take off. So in the middle of all of that, I had some talks that I was giving. and workshops that I was doing at conferences in Europe and in the States. And right in the middle of all of that, my oldest and dearest friend in the world passed. He died of heart failure at only 37 years old. To say that this shattered me during a time that I was already constantly traveling, like I said, living and working in Peru, I was already exhausted. And then this happens. And that's when my photography forever changed. And the wildest thing is, I didn't notice it at the time because you're just so emotionally shell shocked. And I was kind of on autopilot. It was like, I gotta do right by my company and this client. I've got to get through the project. Then I'll get back home to the States and deal with it, I guess, which of course is not what happened at all. When I came home, I just started obsessively photographing everything about what was still a relatively new city to me. I had only moved to San Francisco about a year earlier. I ended up doing a series called Reshape San Francisco that ended up getting some attention, first from the local press, then from some pretty big photo blog that I've been following for years. Adobe reached out and asked, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. I think I'm allowed to say this. I didn't sign an NDA. Adobe basically asked would I would give them my look for free. And I said no. We ended up working out a deal where I did build a series of color filter profiles that are still live in all of the versions of Lightroom on desktop and mobile. The artistic series of color profiles, that's mine, believe it or not. And ultimately it led to Apple featured me on their Instagram, and that's when things really kind of blew up. And I feel like people started to identify this as who I am and aesthetic that I've created that's sort of uniquely mine. I cannot express to you in words how much more meaningful it is than anything that I ever did at an IDEO or a Google, because I'm proud to have worked with those places. They were very generous places to work and they did wonders for my career and I learned quite a lot, but I didn't found those companies. They don't belong to me. Whereas this style of photography is very much mine. And believe it or not, it wasn't until I was putting a talk together for Off Barcelona in 2022. It was the first time that I gave a lecture that was much more deeply personal. I talked about losing my friend. I talked about some of the struggles that I passed and how all of that informs who I am and the work that I do. And I don't know about you, but I'm a cliche designer. I could not be more unorganized. If there was not command space spotlight search on Mac, I would never be able to find a single file on my machine. So when I'm putting a talk together, and especially when I'm telling a chronological story, I just scroll through Google Photos and pull the images that I need from whatever that time period. And I'm scrolling through my time in Peru in 2016 and really kind of tensing up because I'm like I'm about to re-traumatize myself, right? Like I can see chronologically that the loss of my friend is coming up. And of course I get to that moment, and as I keep scrolling, all of the color disappears from my entire Google Photos. And I don't even remember this, but I had gone back to some of the same beautifully colorful places in Lima, in Peru, and recaptured those places. But then the edits were just super dark and more desaturated over time. And like I said, to put a lecture together in 2022, that loss happened in 2016. In the 6 years since, I had never connected that that's why my work changed. That all of the color from my emotional life was disappearing, and that was showing up in my artwork. And as I realized this, as I'm scrolling, it's going to fuck me up talking about it. I just, sitting in this chair in my studio, just started inconsolably bawling, right? To realize 6 years later that, oh my God, the thing that has come to define me as an artist was born out of the loss of someone so meaningful to me. And at first I was really shook by that, but now I see the beauty in it.
Well, it's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like he's around, he's still with you, because I wanted to ask if it's okay. It's interesting. You said when I was going through this, it made sense why the colors disappeared. And as I was making notes as you were speaking, it's like, that was your way to deal with grief. That was the way of just, again, addiction, obsession, grief. Obviously, we go into that space where we just block out the reality, the truth. Sometimes like, okay, what is the best way to sometimes forget about things or just to deal with them? And then again, we can face them head on and have someone teach us, well, for hours and hours as a therapist, like how we can do stuff. Or we can just go and take photos and make a career out of that. Whereas, that's what I wanted to ask you. Like, did you ever think about seeking professional help for grief, or did you just work through it?
I had a great therapist. And believe it or not, the first time that I ever gave a version of that lecture where I talked about the loss and I talked about all of the struggles, believe it or not, the first time I rehearsed that was with my therapist. I meet with her on Friday morning and I said, hey, do you mind if we do something different this week? And then I was like, wait, fuck you. I pay you. I can do whatever I want. So yeah, she was a huge help. And when you share these kinds of stories in a public setting, as I do, you end up connecting with people who have similar stories. And my closest speaker friends on this earth, right? Like Marcel Zuhl, PJ Richardson, Tiago Maya, like all of us connected because we share the things that we do. So no disrespect to my therapist, but those connections might be even more valuable.
When you think about it, it kind of connects it back to the punk rock. It just connects it to another band of brothers because you have friends in the industry coming from similar backgrounds, doing similar thing, understanding your problems, understanding the nuances in the feelings and in the work. So it makes sense when we step back and look at it, like, okay, that's kind of like a valid thought. But I never thought of asking a therapist, like, can we rehearse a talk? Fair play. But it might be cheap. It might be cheaper than a speaking coach.
You've seen my lectures, like that I love to do like research-driven deep dives, right? Like I don't want to just talk about imposter syndrome. I want to understand, like, what do we as a humanity know about this? What have we learned about this? What have people shared about this that they have learned for their research and their efforts? So she loved that. She was like, oh my God, I didn't know about the hedonic treadmill and these authors and psychologists. So I couldn't recommend it more.
Well, I mean, we need both sides of the coin, don't we? But yeah, I mean, the honesty in talks, I think, is something I can relate to because when you put it all out there, you don't have to remember anything. You're telling your story. You're telling the truth. Obviously, you don't pretend to be anybody else. You don't want to be anybody else on that stage. But you want your story to actually send it out there and see actually does it relate to who can actually find something in it. Because we look for. I mean, with all due honesty to some of the speakers, like you got a portfolio talker and then you got a live talker, you got like a live experience designer, live experience creative artist saying like, hey, this is artist life. This is how we live. This is the experiences you might have. And that's how we might influence your work. Or you have that sort of early egoistic sort of sense of identity going, hey, look, I'm looking for acceptance here on this stage. Please tell me you like this. Tell me you like my work because I'm still working on myself. Whereas when you go past that stage, you're like, life can be really tricky, but that's how we deal with it.
Yeah, it's funny. And I'm sure given our age and our place in our careers that we've each done 1,000 portfolio reviews and always tell young artists and designers, whether you're putting a portfolio together or putting a talk together in this industry, and really most any industry, differentiator is everything. And our unique individual stories are what will forever differentiate us from everybody. So the more that you're willing to give, the more that you allow people in to see that, to see past the veneer of the portfolio. And like you said, we're all artists. A lot of us have very interesting stories with respect to how we got here and what informed our careers and what informs our work. But yeah, that's it. It's like anything else. There's no trick to it.
In your lectures, you talk about emotional hardship. Is it necessary? Can we create work that be done without any hardship?
I mean, yeah. So there's a great exchange that I've shown in a few lectures between Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace, and the artist David Cho, where they are discussing precisely this. Right. And David Cho asserts that, hey, you can make great artwork if you're not suffering. Right. But the best art in the world, and his assertion, comes from intense suffering. And then the punchline is, he says, that his sort of thought experiment is, do you then intentionally put yourself as an artist in situations that will cause you pain for the purpose of making great art? And of course, it's David Cho. So he says, yes, like you did. And I mentioned in my lectures that, like, when I first saw that exchange, I was like, oh God, this is like when you're putting a talk together and it's like, oh God, this like perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about or what I want to talk about. And I tell the audience that I always feel this sort of twinge of like reluctance when I know that clip is coming up, because I don't know that when you're given a station, when you're given a platform, when you're on a stage, I do feel that I have a responsibility when I'm on that stage. And am I sort of compromising that responsibility by suggesting that emotional hardship is a requirement of making great art? I wonder if it's irresponsible to express that. But then, and the sort of missing piece to that part of my lectures that I've been offering more recently is a piece that someone really close to me sent me that was written by the musician Nick Cave about the utility of suffering and understanding that suffering is this sort of universal unifying force, right? Like all of us have suffered in different ways, but no matter how we've suffered, each of us has, and we do understand that as part of the human experience. So I don't know that you have to experience emotional hardship or loss or suffering to create great art. But I do know that the best art that I've ever made in my years on this earth, and I didn't know it for 6 years after I started doing it, but ultimately came to realize that, yes, it was born out of the biggest loss and the most intense.
I love how you joined the dots. And I mean, it's a great example of Anthony. I mean, you can argue that Bourdain created most of his body work within, like, suffering deep within, because he was a complicated character, but one that sort of connected on so many levels with so many people. And I think I go for Kitchen Confidentials at least once a year just to get to that sweary part when it's just like, if someone calls you an asshole, you might be in trouble. Everything else is a compliment. But
it's funny also that it's a Bourdain moment, because I never read Kitchen Confidential. My buddy who I lost was always trying to get me to read it. And I only read it in the wake of his loss. I literally read the eulogy at his service, flew to Barcelona, did off Barcelona for the first time, dedicated my talk to him.
yeah, I recommend, I mean, for even greater effect, I recommend the audiobook because it's read by Anthony Bourdain. And as someone who writes books, I'm like, how do you get that tone so good? But the tone is obviously influenced by his life, by his experiences, by like being a bit of a sort of outcast and aloof and just winging it most of the time. It's like, yes, that reminds me of the 90s, how we did stuff. Like that reminds me of the crack copies of Photoshop on the 56K modems. Like that reminds me of the things that we were blagging in, like getting jobs there. We were, we were not even qualified. Even the person giving you the job wasn't particularly qualified for the job back then. So it was just like, we were just making stuff up. And I think that innocence and that space of it was slightly different because we did have almost a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, like, what is this life going to offer me? Like, what can I do with this? Because talking about emotional hardship or intense suffering, in some dose, I mean, I would say like we were microdosing of it. Like we had our sort of tumultuous, crazy childhoods. And I think like we were dealing with things that were somehow pushing us into this lane. Whereas you can argue like, is the world a bit easier right now? Like, are we creating different hardships? Are we creating different sort of sufferings? I mean, I'm not saying that we've solved parenting and everyone's got amazing childhood, but like as the life of an artist, for a newcomer, it's a different story because the accessibility is different. Like, you got zillions of different examples of work that's been done in the last 20 years. It's a bit of a different landscape, isn't it?
I love that you brought this up because I just had a conversation with a good friend in LA, an IDEO buddy of mine, about, he's our age, we came up in the industry at the same time, and we were talking about if we were starting today, would we feel empowered at how accessible everything is, or would we feel completely overwhelmed? It used to be that you could just crack open a text editor and start writing some HTML and put a portfolio together. Now you have all of these crazy build tools, and that's like in sort of the pre-AI era, right? Where it's like all of these frameworks and all of this complexity and then what would imposter syndrome feel like if all of a sudden you could pop open your phone and see all of the incredible artists with their millions of followers on social media, this, that, and the other. Like I said, would we feel, our thought experiment, would we feel empowered, or would we feel so overwhelmed that it's like, oh no, I'm just going to keep unloading trucks for a living?
Yeah, I think you summed it up quite beautifully in one of your talks when you said that what we create now is content. What we used to create was art.
God, yeah. That term, it's just so bothersome that you would call an unbelievably talented artist a content creator. Like, it just takes all of the heart out of the passion and the learning and the struggle. And like, yeah, I think you're right. I gave a talk about the need for regulation in the AI space. And I do wonder how much different the landscape would be in what the present moment would be if, like, content creators, like, content is what you feed to the machine, right? Like, oh, sure, OpenAI and Google and Anthropic and everybody else, they're just scraping content, right? What if we talked about it differently? What if we thought, oh no, they're stealing art. Like, they're stealing beautiful prose and writing and photography and visual art. And I do feel like language matters. And the way that we have sort of systematically devalued creation by referring to it as content, hell, I could do an hour on just that.
I mean, we could easily go for an hour because I would like to, but you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it, because yes, we feel like we are not old timers yet, because there are people in the industry who are older than us, but that snackability, that availability of magic has been demystified. I mean, that the addition of the AI tools like generative fill in Photoshop, I learned how to retouch. I used to work as a retoucher for about a year. Like, you learn how these things work. And I was like, oh, I don't have to spend half an hour trying to make this up. The AI will actually fill the space for me. Actually, they can do this, they can do this. But when you look back, when you look now at people who are at the beginning of their careers, they're bricking it because AI, they believe that AI will steal their job. But as you just beautifully said, like, they are mostly content creators. It's like, what is the value? What is your expression of your soul? Like, what do you put out into this world that is your own? Of course, put it into musical terms, like when you start your own first punk rock band or a metal band, you're going to play covers. You're going to do things you copy, you learn the scales. Like, when you're a young creator, you're going to copy Chuck Anderson or you're going to copy Joshua Davis. Like, we all had like the rock and rollers that we sort of, in that respect, like, who were leading the charge in their creativity because they had signature styles. Whereas now, as you quite rightfully call it, is initiatification. Like, it's just a mash. It's a salad. It's just like basically like a top color tapestry that it just looks the same. And the language matters, because if you were an art creator, if you were someone who doubles down on your identity, especially the one that can transcend you into another places, like, okay, we believe in our titles when they take them upon. Like, I believe in what I do because it gives me some power, that gives me identity, gives me, a direction and purpose. Can you find it with content creation? I don't think you can.
Now, when you hit the nail on the head when you said the word value. And so for the listeners, we met when we spoke at an event called Paradiso in Mexico last month. And one of the speakers was a guy whose work I have long looked up to. His name is Robert Hodgin. He's he's just on a different level. Like, his version of creative code is like, he's playing a different sport than everybody else. He's so good. And it's fun. He's become a friend, and now we check in and we have calls regularly. But I told him just the other day, I talked to him just last Tuesday, and I told him that I took a note from his talk that is still in my phone that I will never erase. He was talking about this moment and he was talking about creating with AI. And I'm looking at the note right now. He said, and I quote, "Things that take no effort are hard to value." And that hit like right in the gut, right? What does a younger artist or designer who is learning to create with these AI tools that do not require your sort of Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours of craft expertise, right? Because it's trained on a bunch of stuff that was made by people who did put in their 10,000 hours of Malcolm Gladwell expertise. What does that young kid growing up in the industry, creating primarily with AI tools, feel now? Like, do they feel that their work, do they personally value their work, and do they feel that their work deserves to be valued as much as someone who did take years and years?
My daughter, she's turned 9 a few weeks ago, and one day from school, she's on her Chromebook in a taxi on the way from school, making images in Firefly. It's like, I want to have a bunny on the back of a zebra or something, or like, and she's making it like, that's just a digital native 3.0. Like, that's just, it's happening. Not on 54K modem. It's on 5G phone. She's on a personal hotspot of my phone in a taxi doing this. And I'm like, well, it's exciting because it's driving her imagination. But how do we explain? I don't know. I mean, we don't have a manual, do we? Like, we don't know where we go with this.
So I'm dying to know, like, what kind of a conversation that you have with a 9-year-old who's creating with these tools. Like, does she understand how Firefly is able to do what it does?
I mean, I don't think when you're 8 or 9, I don't think you go too deep into the ethics of generating AI code. She just literally said, "Oh, what's on your screen, Daddy?" I was like, "It's Firefly." Okay, well, yeah, we use it in school. Like, the school is preparing for them for what's coming. It's not going to be a surprise when they get to 17 or like, oh shit, there's been AI for the last 10 years. But it's a good question. Does she know where those images come from? I don't think she's ever cared, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's most folks don't know, and I've mentioned this in a lecture, that there's a site called haveibeentrained.com, which is a very unfortunate name for a website, but of course, what it means is, have my images been used to train these models? And I was shocked to find my photos in there. And I currently serve as a design partner at Strange Ventures. We literally, our whole job is advising and investing in early stage creative AI startups. I very much enjoy playing with these technologies. It's been a big part of my identity for as long as I've been in the industry. I just love taking the tires on whatever the new shit and figuring out how it works. And most importantly, figuring out how does this better enable us to sort of run the whole of the design process. Now, I have in all the robots.txt files on all of my sites, I have protections in place that you can say, hey, all of these bots do not crawl this site. But the challenge is, like I said, my project and my work back around 2017 started getting a fair amount of press and attention. Those sites, all of those Adobe and Apple and all of the photography blogs and publications that interviewed me, they don't have those protections on their site. So it took me a minute to figure out, wait, why do they only have those images of mine and not all of them, right? Well, it's because those were the images in each of those blog posts. So the better known that you become as an artist or designer, the more at risk you are of having your work used to train these models, because you have no control over whether or not these sites that interview you and feature your work have any security mitigations in place. And the reality, of course, is that most of them don't, because if they did, there would be no AI chatbots. That's a challenge. But I've certainly thought about, I have a couple of godsons who are 6 years old, and they have an older sister who's very artistic. She just turned 12. And as they start playing with this stuff, I'm like, wow, to your point, it's not like your average 9-year-old has considered the ethical implications of how an AI model is trained. But I am always curious, like, do they know how this magic happens? Because it's not magic at all.
Would you describe it about the bot file and the scraping in mid 2000s when we put our portfolios up and we had like 1 million page views a year? But like, this is a great stuff. I've checked my analytics just for a joke recently. Like, oh, we're back to 1,000,000 page views a month. Oh yeah, that's all the AI crawlers. All the AI crawlers are just basically just scraping around because you hear about it. I put a notice in a sidebar file or in a bot file, and you're like, I'm just 2 years too late. It's just like the website has been already in the public. It's been scraped so many times. Like it, what can I do? And enjoyed. I think enjoy is the wrong word to use. I was mesmerized by the talk by Carol Cadwalladr from Observer, who did a TED talk recently on the topic of big tech and AI, like how all of these models have been trained already to mimic us quite well. Like she was giving an example, like how we can write an article in her style of journalism. She says it's pretty close. The only problem is I never gave them permission to teach the AI on my content.
Yeah. And you probably won't be surprised to hear that when I was at Google and I left in early 2023, but I was still there when ChatGPT launched. And when it did, it was like, oh yeah, we have like dozens of these internally that we're testing because of course we do, right? Like Google published the first paper on a transformer. ChatGPT stands for general purpose pre-trained transformer, right? Like Google had the tech, right? They published the paper on it. But there were a million reasons that we did not release these publicly, right? Obviously, the copyright and ethical consideration, all of the harm that can be done, right? We're seeing sort of identity theft and phishing scams just popping off like crazy. We're seeing scams where folks are using technology like 11 Labs to, what do you need, like 30 seconds of audio to clone someone's voice, and then you can call some unsuspecting family member and pretend to be another family member in trouble. We need money, right? Like all of these things, like we talked about internally, and we knew this is why we're not yet putting this tech out into the world. But then of course, OpenAI launches theirs, and all of a sudden there's the first meaningful challenge to Google's core search business. And at the time, 25 years? So, your shareholders are going to scream bloody murder and say, hey, where's your version, right? And now here we are, when we should have been having a conversation as a society about here are all of the potential benefits and all the potential downside. Let's mitigate those before we launch these out into the world.
Let's finish on a positive note, if there's one. Yeah, let's go to Summit. So where do you see yourself using what you know, what you've done, and the sort of the possibilities of where your work can be actually within the next few years with everything that we've got around? Because there's just like with everything, there's time and place to embrace it and do something that actually then enhances the expression of your soul, of your creativity, of your art.
Yeah, if I could figure out how to do things that bankroll me traveling the world and making beautiful images and creating photography books, like that would be the dream. But I haven't yet figured out what exactly that is. I'm doing a lot more lecturing than I have been in years past, ever since I left Google, because I have more time than I'm able to do it. Big part of my lectures, I talk about, I highlight, I show photos of everyone who has ever opened the door for me in my career, everyone to whom I owe a debt of gratitude for working the places I have, for succeeding in the ways that I have. They are as big a part of it as I am. So when I think about my future and the next 20 odd years of my career as a designer and a design leader, that is the thing that I prioritize the most, is growing that next generation of design leaders. At the same time, I've been leaning more into lecturing. I have a couple of agencies who represent me now in my talks. So that may end up becoming more of a priority than it has in the past. So that I'm certainly looking forward to. I have a photography book that I plan to put out this year. I am completely obsessed with visiting, experiencing, and photographing the most beautiful metro stations in the world. I think in part that is because in the United States, we don't really prioritize train travel or public transportation. If you've ever seen our most storied metro lines, whether it's in my home city of Chicago or New York, you would not describe them as beautiful. So I'm certainly taken when I visit these Eastern European countries and seeing these sort of palatial stations. I've amassed a collection that's big enough now that I believe I can put out a book. yeah, beyond that, just sort of being open to seeing where the day takes me. I don't have a concrete plan for what comes next, and I'm embracing and celebrating that.
Well, it takes us back to what you said at the very beginning. It's creating without permission. So, salute you. Keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. This has been a blast. You're a wonderful interviewer, and this is I knew this would be a fun conversation, so I appreciate it.
Thank you for saying those words. Thank you.
Cheers.
Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Mindful Creative Podcast. I'd love to know your thoughts, questions, or even suggestions, so please get in touch via the show notes or social channels. This episode was produced and presented by me, Radim Malinic. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil McKay from 7 Million Bikes Podcast, and the theme music was written and produced by Jack James. Thank you, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Hey, just a quick note to say thank you for joining me on this episode. If this is your first time or you're a regular listener, please take a minute and rate the show on your chosen platform. A short review helps every show to be more visible to new listeners and provide them with value. So thank you for helping out. Thank you.